Thanks for staying with us here on Breakfast Central. Let's start off with a very interesting conversation. Meta, the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, is threatening to pull the plug on Facebook and Instagram access in Nigeria. So if you're a content creator, or better still, you get your information from these platforms, you might want to be careful. Well, that's because the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, FCCPC, seem to see this as a tantrum to dodge hefty privacy violation fines. But here's what we know, and here's what's been brewing between Meta and Nigeria's regulatory agency. Now, back in July 2024, the FCCPC slammed Meta with a 220 million naira fine for multiple data privacy violations. The decision came after an investigation into Meta and WhatsApp, collectively referred to as the Meta parties, for breaching Nigeria's consumer protection and also data protection laws.
The FCCPC found that Meta denied Nigerian users meaningful control over their data, shared personal information without consent, treated Nigerian users unfairly compared to users in other countries, and abused its dominant market position through exploitative privacy policies. But Meta told the BBC that Nigerians might lose access to Facebook and Instagram altogether, citing unrealistic regulatory demands and growing pressure from Nigerian authorities. Joining us to unpack these issues are fintech expert and founder of Ancestors Advisory, Fishayo Durojaye, and we also have Adeboye Adegoke, Senior Manager for Grants and Strategy at the Digital Rights Advocacy Group Paradigm Initiative. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
All right, let's begin in the studio first before we come to you, Veteran. I think to start here in the studio to ask, like Nigerian parlance, is this initial gra-gra? Are they just bluffing? Do you think they would actually up and leave?
Well, okay, so like I said before, right, this is not the first time Meta has threatened to leave any country. They threatened to leave Australia because of similar data privacy issues. They threatened to leave the Eurozone entirely, or Europe, right, because of, again, GDPR type regulation. So it's not the first time. And of course, is it legally possible? Yes, it is legally possible. But I don't think that it is economically unlikely. So again, I'll explain what I mean. It means that legally they can say, well, we're not, operating in Nigeria again. But it means that for that to happen economically, it means that, again, Nigerian government needs to maybe block essentially access to Facebook or Instagram for Nigerians specifically, right? So that is how they can economically live. But again, that is actually very unlikely. So again, we'll see where this goes. But like I said, this is not the first time they've threatened any country. But eventually, they always found a middle ground between the regulators and, of course, the companies. So eventually, they never really left.
Now, let me bring in Adeboye, who's joining us virtually. What exactly are the violations that led to this $220 million fine against Meta? And Meta has also claimed that regulatory demands are unrealistic. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or it's a deflection from compliance?
All right, thank you. About what led us here. I remember we had this conversation about 9 months ago when the fine was first issued. And this is an outcome of an investigation conducted by FCCPC and in collaboration with NIDA at the time. Now the NDPC, and the allegations against Meta is that they are engaging in unfair practices, abusing their market dominance or privilege in terms of some of the updates they did on WhatsApp specifically. So in 2021, just to take us back, WhatsApp has requested for its users in Nigeria to accept a new update. And they gave subscribers just a month to accept that update, in which case, if you don't accept the update, you will not have access to WhatsApp anymore. So the FCCPC in the investigation ruled that such, giving its users such options was unfair, especially compared to what obtains in other parts of the world. So the idea was that given the market dominance of Meta as owners of, WhatsApp, Facebook and Instagram, it was asking its users to either accept or lose access to the platform in a situation, in a context whereby you know for a fact that most of these users have no other option than to accept. So it's almost like you just put them in a situation whereby they can't say no. So that's one issue. Another issue is around data protection, whereby the FCCPC argue that the privacy notice that was given to users in Nigeria is unfair if you compare it to what obtains in other places. And one of the requests that was also made of Meta was that that's by the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, is that Meta must give users the ability to either give or deny, consent to their data being shared by Meta with its other subsidiaries and outside of the country. So this is what led us to this place.
All right. I mean, that's a whole lot, breaking it down and looking at what the possibilities are. But do you think it's actually fair on the part of Nigerians and most importantly the FCCPC? Because if we take a look at it, these fines in other countries have also been, slammed on Meta, and at the end of the day, they've negotiated, they've also come to an agreement, and they've complied. So, do we see them complying, if at all? I'm going to go back to you virtually before we do come back to the studio.
They paid in France and South Korea.
Yeah, I mean, and all that. Do you think they will comply?
Well, I believe they will comply, but of course not without a fight. I mean, they are a business concern, and you wouldn't expect that they should just pay any fine that has been imposed on them. What any reasonable business entity would do in situations like this is to fight until they can negotiate, if possible, to zero fine, to a slap in the wrist, and hopefully, if that cannot be achieved, they would expect that the fine will be significantly reduced. But I believe they will comply, and this is why I say so. If you look at the as you have rightly said yourself, Nigeria is not the first country to have fined Meta or even other entities like this. So I don't think it is strange that they are being fined. Nigeria is only exercising its regulatory responsibility over this actor. But in situations like this, even if you leave the technology ecosystem, if you go to any sector, whether oil and gas, even the tobacco industry, anytime that the authorities fine or exert certain regulatory measures, you would expect the player to fight back, to push back until they can have some leverage. The same thing happened to MTN. If you remember, some years ago, MTN was fined, and they kept fighting it until it got to the highest authority in Nigeria. And there was a negotiation. The fine was significantly reduced, and they eventually agreed to pay what it was reduced to. So I do think that they will comply at some point, but they will fight to finish, even if it means that they should push this onto the highest adjudicatory authority, which I think they should do. If I was advising them, that's exactly what I would advise them to do. But to quickly touch on the headline about Meta threatening to leave Nigeria because of this fine, it's also, for me, it's also part of the negotiation tactics to kind of create that fear, to kind of create, because you know how valuable the platform is to Nigeria. Nigeria use it for businesses, WhatsApp, everything. In fact, when I was contacted to come on this interview, I was just about starting a business that I started the conversation on Instagram. Then we came to conclude it on WhatsApp when I saw the call to come here. So it is very it's a strategic company to Nigeria economy as we speak. We cannot deny that. And Meta as a company also understand that leverage and is trying to push as much as possible to kind of force the hand of the regulatory authority to reduce as much as possible, if not even totally cancel the fine. But what I am seeing, just as a projection, is that the fine might be reduced at some point to kind of have some balance in terms of, you don't want to discourage innovation, but at the same time, you want to be assertive in ensuring that you assert your regulatory responsibility over Meta as an actor in the sector.
All right, let's now bring in Fisayo into the conversation. You've said that it's a negotiation tactic. The regulatory authorities have called their bluff, and they've said that they can't allow their hands be tied to their back. Let's imagine worst case scenario. Worst case scenario in this instance, meaning that Meta pulls out of Nigeria. What sort of economic implications will this incur, and what sort of short and long-term disruptions are we going to experience?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Again, sorry, just to take back from that, I think that while Meta needs to negotiate, I think it's also important for Meta to understand, for us to understand that if Meta allows the fine to go through, right, it means that there could be, other effects. So it means that Ghana can do the same, any other country can do the same. So again, they're trying to figure out how do I not create, a precedent to say any country can just, fine, at least in Africa, and in Europe, yeah, they probably have done that a couple of times. But in Africa, we've not seen that kind of fine, a lot more, right? So it is just to ensure that yes, they are protected on either side. And of course, when I say that, how does that affect, people economically? It means that businesses that are being done. So, for instance, there are many people that are content creators today, right, where their business is essentially saying that they're creating content on all these social media apps. And of course, Instagram is one of the biggest, platform for that. There is trade happening, meaning that people that are, selling their goods on Instagram. So it means that you start commission on Instagram with an Instagram DM. It moves from that to a WhatsApp chat, and of course, so again, it is. Nigerian businesses or small businesses, SMEs, are largely dependent on that platform to start conversation around trade or just to build awareness, at all. Across other platforms. So it means that anyone in Nigeria today can start a business by sitting at home, creating an Instagram account, and then start, their publicity generally from there. So it's been very valuable, for Nigerians to use, essentially. So the economic, implication can be very devastating for small business, because if both Instagram and, they didn't mention WhatsApp, right? Instagram and Facebook, is taken out, then I'm not sure. Well, maybe other platforms like say TikTok, which again has a different use case and stuff, might step in. But I think that to a large extent, small businesses will probably bear the brunt, and of course, nobody wants that eventually.
All right. Now, just following up on what you said, it appears from your analysis, it appears we have more to lose from our end, and that brings me to this question: how enforceable are these fines and sanctions against a company that is as large and globally entrenched like Meta? Since you just said the implication. Even companies running businesses, so many people use platforms like WhatsApp. They have WhatsApp groups. They use it for in-house communications and all of that. So I think Meta understands that, look, you guys will have more to lose. So they're playing hardball. Yeah. So if we call their bluff and say, okay, go ahead and do your worst, how do we now enforce this ban?
First is that I think it was Meta that threatened to leave, right? The regulators are not threatening them to leave. They say, well, you have to comply with us, right? So how enforceable is that? Because it's a global company, you can do as much. At some point, if, to enforce the ban, it means that they have to ensure that they have, enforce their own leverage, meaning that do I have to then restrict, WhatsApp access? And of course, how do I do that? Speak to, internet service providers in Nigeria. And similar to the way, Twitter or X, back in the days was banned in Nigeria, where people then have to figure out a way to continue to access it on their own. So they can leverage, control around internet service providers here in Nigeria to ensure that, yes, they don't, load the pages of Meta, so either Instagram, Facebook, or potentially even WhatsApp, right? So that's a way for them to essentially, force the hand, of Meta. So again, I have to ask, how strategically important is Nigeria, particularly to Meta, right, from an advertising revenue type perspective? Because again, how they make money, from the platform. I would, again, from the last data I see, I think that, from Nigeria, I think they made less than $50 million, if I remember correctly, right? Again, I have to check and confirm that. But in the grand scheme of things, where a company that makes billions and billions of dollars in revenue from advertising, which is their primary business, right? I would think that it's a very negligible revenue stream for them.
All right, I want to now go back to Adegoke. If again, still looking at worst case scenario, if Meta pulls out, do you think that our local tech, the tech within Nigeria, can fill in the vacuum that will be left behind?
Thank you for that very brilliant question. And, it's very important for us to understand how we got here in the first place. And if you look at how we have been having this conversation, the context setting around this conversation, it exactly explains why it was important for those regulatory action to be taken. We are dealing in a situation whereby Meta has become so powerful to the extent that asking them to obey or comply with our laws has led us to conversation around, oh, if they go, what will it do to our economy, etc. And that's because we didn't, not just Nigeria, globally, tech regulation wasn't a conversation that was started early enough. So before regulation conversation started, some of these companies like Meta have acquired so much, relevance, they have acquired so much resources, they have acquired all their potential competition. Remember, Instagram, WhatsApp were independent, companies that were acquired by Facebook. So what has happened is that this company has become so big and has dominated the market to the point that you can hardly hold them accountable for anything without threatening you. Now, to come to your question about whether local tech can fill in the gap, I don't see that happening. I don't think the local tech ecosystem has been developed to the point whereby it can fill such gap. But what I also know is that we live, it's a global economy, right? We live in a global village. So if I'm thinking in terms of, let's even say Meta pulls out and we don't have Facebook without Instagram, trust me, some alternatives already exist that are not popular, that are not as powerful, and that will not be as effective immediately if they have to step in, and fill that gap. They already exist, and they are not necessarily local alternative, but they are also, they also provide similar services like short messaging services, social media platform. And I'm not even talking about the popular ones like TikTok. I'm talking about smaller other platforms that some people are already using, but that are not as popular. I don't have a lot of people on them. So they cannot immediately fill that type of gap if Meta should step out now. But I want us to pay attention to the important lesson in this conversation, which is the fact that you should never allow an entity to have so much market dominance to the point that you are literally scared that if this entity should pull out, our economy is going to crash, it's going to affect small businesses and all that, which is what exactly the FCCPC is trying to address, to say that the outsized and market dominance of Meta has to be checked. Meta continues to, abuse that dominance that he has in them. And this is not a Nigerian conversation. It is exactly what is happening in the EU as well. EU is trying to achieve the same thing, to say that, you cannot continue to abuse your dominance, your market dominance, to the point that, number one, you are not allowing innovation. Because one of the things that happens when an actor becomes so big within a sector is that they destroy every potential competition. So every new innovation that can potentially offer the kind of services that they offer now, they either go in and buy them or employ other tactics to make sure that they don't become as big as they are. So
maybe we can say that
these are the issues.
It is a monopoly of some sorts, right? But the question now is, like you say, no entity should be allowed to be that big. Is this not a conversation that we're having a little too late? And do you think that this lesson that you're saying our government that we should have learned, do you think that we are actually going to learn this lesson? I'm assuming that what you would infer is that it should be a wake-up call for Nigeria to invest in, local tech, indigenous tech, regional and continental tech alliances to ensure that we don't have a repeat of situations like this. But do you think that we're learning this lesson at all from here?
I honestly hope we are, but it's also a very complicated conversation because previously, I'm speaking to you this way today. If you brought me to your channel maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago to come and talk about this issue that government is threatening or has fined a company like Meta, I will come here to tell you that, they want to restrict people's right to use platform for expression and all of that, because there is also issue around trust. We don't trust government to the level whereby platforms that have given us an opportunity to express ourselves, that when government come on them like this, we don't trust the intention. So there is a trust deficit that happens that slows down even government ability to introduce regulation. But there is also what we also must acknowledge is also that there is also the knowledge gap. The problem is not a Nigeria problem. Even in the EU, they were late to the party in terms of regulation. So a country like Nigeria was only able to try to take measures after we have the EU show some leadership in terms of how do you regulate big tech, how do you put data protection laws in place, etc. But the important lesson that we have to take is that we are late, as you rightly said, but if we are late, then the right thing to do is, if the best time to do this was yesterday, then the next best time is today. It is not for us to now continue to drag this and all of that. We must be willing to learn by experience. I mean, for the regulators, this is also like gambling, because you don't really know how this will pan out, whether this will significantly impact the economy negatively. But I believe that there is a lot of, options that are available, and that's why I said that I don't think Meta will pull out, because at some point, this does not stop at the table of the FCCPC. At some point, I imagine that higher authority may come in. You might have the Ministry of Communication also coming in, Ministry of Trade coming in, even if it has to get to the level of the presidency to kind of protect the digital economy, to kind of protect the small businesses that rely on WhatsApp, on Facebook, etc., to do their businesses. I think we can manage the situation. That's the point I'm saying, while we learn from the experience and also position ourselves to better engage. And you mentioned something very critical, which I would like to wrap up on, which is the fact that in terms of looking at this regionally or continentally, I also think that the point that was made around the revenue that maybe Meta gets from Nigeria is significant. It also affects the ability of the regulator to exert its authority. If an EU fine Meta $1 billion, you will not hear Meta saying things like, we are going to leave EU, because EU has the market size, it has the ability, the leverage to kind of rein in Meta to comply to its rules. But individual countries in Africa may not have that type of leverage because of the size of the market. That is why Africa as a continent must negotiate as a unit. So let's not just limit this conversation as Nigeria engaging Meta. Let's see, one of my proposition would be that Africa must come together, band together, and see how do we think of regulating the big tech from a continental perspective, so that you can have better bargaining power and better bargaining arguments.
All right, thank you.
Good point there. Nigeria is taking the battle against big tech on behalf of Africa. Fisayo, the last time Mark Zuckerberg was in Nigeria, was having a great time jogging on Lekki, Ikoyi Bridge, eating suya, So he's a friend of Nigeria. How do you see, I know you don't have a crystal ball in front of you, but how do you see this playing out?
I think that everyone will come to the table. The Minister for Communications, Bosun Tijani, is strong supporter of Nigeria's tech ecosystem. So I don't think he would watch and allow some of these things to escalate to the point where Meta would eventually leave as well. And of course, when it comes to even trade, small businesses, everyone are stakeholders in this in this conversation. So it's not just about FCCPC alone. It's also around the broader economic conversations there. So I mean, like you said, this conversation is going to go from they'll exhaust all the appeal legal path possible, and of course come to the table and then have an agreement to say, okay, well, this is how we're going to move forward, to deal with this issue going forward as well. So I guess I will
even those of us on this panel, we use WhatsApp for our editorial meetings. If they take away WhatsApp, we'll be having our meetings in Olive's house and be eating jollof rice every evening.
Isn't it an indictment on Nigeria's tech ecosystem? Don't you think by now, I mean, China, they do have WeChat, they have their own version of the YouTube. They don't depend on the regular one that everyone uses. So, I mean, fintech, everyone is now tilting towards fintech because maybe
with all the tech benefits we have.
You're a tech pro as well, if I put it that way. So why have you not created our very own,
I'm more of a finance bro in tech
than
tech. But again, I would say China has about 1 billion people, so they can afford to do that. So which is why, rather than Nigeria working in silos, it can leverage, Africa's over 1 billion people to say, do we create, something ourselves? So China is the only one that seems to be able to, build, directly, because they have the people and the numbers to ensure that that is done. And of course, I don't know if they have the leverage. They have the workforce, they have the leverage, essentially, because they are, I think one of the senators Senator Kennedy in the US says that God created heaven and earth. Every other thing has been in China, right? So again, that they're able to do that because they have that leverage, right? But Nigeria, we have a lot more things to do.
We've just not thought about it right in terms of, because I know there are a lot of tech companies and people are joining forces, seeing what they can create. Or is it a case of, is Nigeria made so we don't believe in it? No. I've seen some apps though from very young, tech professionals that come up with apps that have a resemblance with that of WhatsApp. But then again, it seems like Nigerians are not embracing it because.
So I don't think we have a tech problem. I think Nigerians can build this. There's nothing technically difficult for Nigerians to build because we build more complex things before. I guess the bigger problem is to say how do you get the momentum to go? Because again, the more people are on the platform, the more the platform becomes viable. So it's called network effect. So right now, my mom is on Facebook. So if I start to build a new one, I have to get my mom to get on it so that it will convince me to be on it. Then my friends have to be on it. Then it becomes valuable.
Yeah.
But right now, everyone is already on Instagram. Everyone's already. Why would I,
leave it and follow and call Luku?
So that's where the problem really starts from. So it's not about the technical, ability to build. It's about, how do you create that network effect to ensure that yes, you're able to build that momentum.
I mean, from all that you both have said, I think that the main thing I can take away from this is to hope that everyone comes to the table and we find a resolution. But beyond that, we also need to be more proactive than reactive. We didn't need to wait to get to this level to start thinking. And then we now, like both of you have said, we need to think about working together as opposed to working in silos, and then find a way to find that middle ground between protecting national interests and then ensuring that we're not scaring investors and innovators. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this morning.
Thank you
for joining us, both of you. To our guests, Fisayo Durojaye and Adeboye Adegoke. Thank you for your time.